Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a review of Lord of the Jungle #6 from Dynamite Comics. This is the final issue in the first plot line of this officially licensed Tarzan series. And so I've done reviews of the other issues, and so this one's going to be a little bit different. I don't want to be redundant, and there's not a whole lot I can say here without spoiling this final issue. I will be doing a spoiler video probably next week, with my spoiler thoughts on the whole plot line. But for this non-spoiler review, I just want to focus on my very personal thoughts about this, very specific to me and my reaction to the plot line. This comic is available in local comic shops. It's available digitally on Comixology, and it should have a trade paperback coming out at some point. It's not solicited yet, but it is pretty industry standard to print all your plot lines in a trade paperback at some point. This issue does bring the first plot line to a very satisfying conclusion, but it does also have a big teaser for the second plot line. And unfortunately, there is no indication that that second plot line is going to happen right now. That is very disappointing. I am not going to dwell on that in this video. I want these reviews to be about the content of these comics and my reaction to them. So if I feel like venting, I will probably do that in another video. And just to get this out of the way, yeah, the cover has nothing to do with the interior, and I just don't understand it at all. There's a giant crocodile jumping out of the water. Tarzan's fighting him in midair. I have no idea. I think I would have been more satisfied with any of the variant covers, but I didn't know what they looked like before this issue shipped. So if there is a next time, hopefully Dynamite does better on its cover game, because that is really my only complaint, is just the covers. So before I talk about the story for this plot line, I wanted to mention just what a great choice it was having Benito Gallego as the artist. Obviously, his artwork resembles the Buscema's at Marvel, right, when they did Tarzan, but he also has been doing some really great work on the online comic strip of Tarzan at edgarriceburris.com. Highly recommend subscribing to that, and was just a really great choice on the part of Dynamite. It really sends a signal like, hey, we know what we're doing. So let's talk about the story of the series. So it's been over 2 decades since we have had a series or miniseries devoted to the character of Tarzan. Like the stuff you see around me, it's been over 20 years, right? We've had crossovers with other characters, but not a regular series just devoted to Tarzan. And so in that gap, I would have taken just about anything. As I said in my Gru Tarzan review, I would have taken the most run-of-the-mill paint-by-number story as long as it was done well. But to my surprise, this delivers not 1 but 2 plot lines with Tarzan I've never seen before. So one of them is an exploration of what Tarzan would be like if he became an old man, right? If he aged naturally and he became a crotchety old senior citizen, what would Tarzan be like? And that's a very interesting idea. In a previous review, I said we've had glimpses of that in like alternate realities and stuff, but this is the first story that I've really seen explore it, and it's really cool to see kind of Return of the Dark Ape Man or Old Man Tarzan, however you want to phrase it, but it's kind of cool to see that type of story. And the second story is it goes back and retells his origin in a new way. Now, we have seen plenty of adaptions of Tarzan of the Apes. I actually did a video on a bunch of them, right? But the adaptions that I have seen have basically been transcribing that novel with changes, right? And some of them are very significant changes, but it's still trying to transcribe that novel, right, with changes. This is a new take on his origin. It's taking those elements from the novel and kind of remixing them and creating a new story. And this is really exciting because I've never seen this done in comics. Well, I've seen it done a few times in like TV or movies, but not in comic books, which is very, very strange because it's been done with just about everybody else. Superman had Man of Steel, Batman had Batman Year One, and even lesser known characters like Paul Chadwick's amazing run on Concrete had Concrete Strange Armor. And even when the origins weren't being rebooted, there were still alternate takes on them, like the Earth One line from DC or the Ultimate line from Marvel Comics. And just about every character I can think of has had this, right? Conan, Zorro, Green Hornet, you name it. Everybody has had a story like this, except Tarzan. And so it is really cool to finally see a comic book writer be able to come in there and bring their talents, tell a new origin that gives us a Tarzan that is pretty darn close to the one that we've always known, but we get there in a way that we haven't seen before. And so to combine both of these concepts and have a framing sequence with Old Man Tarzan flashing back to Tarzan Year One is just such a really cool idea for a series. But what surprised me was just how darn good this series was. Because while I'm reading this, we have a renaissance of some of the best writers in the industry coming back to write comic books. So while I was reading Lord of the Jungle, I was also reading Ronin Book 2 by Frank Miller, which is being published by Frank Miller Presents. Dark Horse has been publishing new comics by the great Kevin Smith. And the amazing Ryan North is writing Fantastic Four. And so I've got the creme de la creme of comic book writers in my pull box every month, right? And every single month, what is my favorite comic? Lord of the Jungle, written by Dan Jurgens. And that surprised me, but maybe it shouldn't have. Obviously, Dan Jurgens has had time to refine his craft and improve as a writer, but you know what? He was always a darn good writer. And so, like many people, my first encounter with Dan Jurgens' work was on the Superman titles. And back in the 90s, if you bought one Superman title, you had to buy the rest because they ran their plot lines and subplots through all the different titles. And so Dan Jurgens was really the guy that kept me buying that whole line of comics. Because the other titles, I mean, sometimes they were decent, but sometimes they were also bland. But man, Dan Jurgens' stuff, not only was the artwork excellent, but the story tended to be just more exciting, more engaging, more original, more interesting than the others. And the thing that made his work so unique on those titles was his ability to humanize Superman. There's very few writers that I can say that about. And so if you want an example of how Dan Jurgens can elevate a story, look no further than his most famous work, Superman 75. And so this was the conclusion of the Doomsday storyline, which was essentially a big monster shows up that likes to destroy stuff. Superman and Doomsday get in a big fight. At the end, they beat each other to death. And this is not necessarily the most exciting story in the world, right? This is pretty run-of-the-mill stuff, especially for the 90s. Every comic fan knew Superman was going to come back. I mean, heck, they'd even done a story back in the 80s where he dies, has a funeral, and comes back from the dead. I mean, who did they think they were kidding? And so they counted down to Superman's death in the final month of the plot line by having each issue have fewer and fewer panels on each page. And so by the time you got to that last issue, it was all splash pages. It was all one panel per page. And so Dan Jurgens had only 27 panels to make you care about a death that you knew was going to be undone in a few months. Jurgens is able to accomplish this partly through his amazing, iconic artwork on the issue. But part of that is also the storytelling decisions, like having Superman be able to say goodbye to his fiancée, Lois Lane, and to have Superman sacrifice himself while saving Jimmy and Lois. We see the death blow reflected in the lens of Jimmy Olsen's camera as Jimmy and Lois look on. We see Superman's parents mourning his death as they watch it on TV. We see the Justice League arrive just a couple minutes too late to save Superman. Superman dies in Lois's arms. And then, of course, the final panel. And so if Dan Jurgens can take an okay idea and turn it into a classic, Imagine what he can do with something that's already a classic. And that is why I give my highest possible recommendation for buying and reading Lord of the Jungle. Definitely, definitely, if you're a Tarzan fan, and even if you're not, please, please give this a try. All right, that's it. Again, unfortunately, there is no indication that the second plot line is happening, but please, please support this series. Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. is on board. Dan Jurgens would love to do the second plot line, obviously. It's just Dynamite, I think, needs some convincing. So please, please support this series as much as you can. All right, like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.